Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. The knife may have cut deeper than expected. In an attempt to quash diploma mills profiting off foreign students looking for a way into the country, a federal government cut to the total number of international student permits has led to a financial crisis amongst established post-secondary schools. Meet Alex Usher. He is the president of Higher Education Strategy Associates and says colleges cutting programs because they can't afford them was a financial trouble that didn't start with the new caps.
Our universities and colleges would not have got into this mess, would not have gone chasing international student dollars if Ontario weren't the worst funded system in the entire country.
And this is Mikal, Skuterud, a fellow in residence at the CD Howe and a professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Waterloo. He's done extensive work for the Institute on its intersection with immigration policy.
The point system is a prediction of migrants' future earnings in Canada, and that's what needs to be prioritized. And that's not what's being prioritized now.
As the topics of education and immigration converge, they join us now. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Have we at least shut down those diploma mills used as backdoor access to Canada?
So I'm not sure. Let's be clear about what we mean by diploma mills, right? Like, I think what the institutions that attracted the most opprobrium were institutions primarily in the GTA who were, in effect, franchising curriculum from public colleges. Okay, so when people talk about diploma mills, they're actually talking about publicly funded colleges in Ontario who chose to use private companies as to deliver their program to students that they couldn't or didn't want to bring to their home community. So, you had Northern College from Timmins. They had, 700 students in Timmins and 7,000 students in the GTA. Right. So that's really what was happening. Those got shut down almost immediately. And that was simply because, and it wasn't even necessarily about visas. It was just, they said, we no longer give a pathway to permanent residency to anyone who's using a franchised curriculum. So that killed those off almost immediately. Those places had taken in students in May. They were mostly taught out by April of this year. So they're done. Right. Like, I would say most of them, there would still be some available for various reasons, but it's hard if you're not the appeal of those institutions was you could live in Toronto where it was thought there was a lot of jobs and, and you had a path to citizenship. So for the most part, those guys are gone. Yes.
Mikal, is it fair to describe the issue as backdoor access to Canada in the first place? How big of a problem was it actually?
No, I've actually pushed very directly against that characterization of the issue. I think that's a complete misrepresentation of what happened. The international education strategy was a very deliberate policy led by the federal government and pushed down to the provinces. It was long-standing. It predates the Liberal government who really took off with it. And that strategy was a movement to what we call two-step immigration, where the model is you bring migrants to Canada. They study in post-secondary institutions in Canada. They acculturalize, they learn the language, they get Canadian credentials, and they become model new permanent residents, new immigrants in Canada. That has a lot going for it. You wouldn't have found many economists that would disagree with that model. And that was what was sold to these migrants. So it's far from a backdoor. They came here under this model, this expectation of two-step immigration that they were sold. So very much a front door policy.
So if we remove the political charged rhetoric associated with the file, where do we stand right now on the issue?
That's a good question. Where do we stand? I think we're in limbo. We've had a change in government, and maybe Alex knows more than me, but I certainly haven't. I was contacted by the previous minister somewhat regularly. I have not had any contact with the federal government on immigration since there's been a change in the government. And I think there's a lot of, let's just take a step. My sense is they're taking a step back, and there's a lot of internal thinking about how to proceed. I think there's a lot of big questions on how to proceed. I'm optimistic they're going to go in a positive direction, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't know.
What was new about this policy, or it was perceived to be new, was the idea that it applied to community colleges, right? Like when this policy was brought in, under Stephen Harper, 2008, 2009, around there. And, the idea was we got lots of people coming over here for, top university programs. Let's let them stay. And it wasn't until about 2016, 2017 that the college sector really started to monetize it and said, wait a minute, these rules all apply to us. We can do it. And so now the value Canada had two value propositions, right? One was come to Canada, come to a great university, spend a long time in university, and then, go your own way. And you had colleges that were saying, come to us, spend 8 months in our college, and you're on the way to citizenship. People started to look a little bit askance at that one. That maybe the value proposition, that was a great value proposition for the students who came in, might not have been as great a value proposition for Canada because the talent level was not necessarily at the same level. At the same time, you had the housing crisis, let's call it that, right? Is we brought a lot of people in without improving the housing stock. We brought them into very small areas, right? Like so much of that is GTA, maybe parts of Southern Ontario, parts of the lower mainland in BC, Halifax, Like there were a few spots around the country where it was really converged. And in the summer of 2024, it blew up. Summer 2023, sorry, and summer 2024, those markets just went crazy and became a political issue. For better or for worse, I think the federal Liberals think they solved that issue. That is, there is, the rents are going down again. Why touch the the international student file? Like, I just don't think they'll touch it because they don't want to, they've been burnt once. I'm not sure they want to put their fingers near the element again.
But where does this leave the college system? We know that we've seen a remarkable number of layoffs, and the colleges that are dealing with that pullback have found themselves in a scenario where they're going to have to start deciding which programs they're going to keep, which programs they're going to cut. Does this create sort of like a bifurcation within education where some institutions can afford to provide a more interesting higher level type of education and others are just trying to get the basics out because they can't afford to expand?
So, Mikal, let me start with this because I'm going to contain my answer to colleges. I think there's a different answer for universities. We can follow up on that if you want. I don't think there's no two-tier issue. There's no two-tier issue in colleges. They're all getting paid badly by the provincial government. Are they cutting programs? Yes. My estimate is we probably lost about 1,000 programs in the last 12 months or so.
And give me some perspective. What does losing 1,000 programs mean?
That means every institution cut 50 programs. Lots of those programs didn't have students or weren't going to have students. That is, they were programs that were so targeted to the international market that you take them away. There was no reason to do it. And when people talk about layoffs, look at the data that was in the court, not the administrators ruling, the arbitrators ruling, pardon me. When they were saying actually 75% of the cuts were part-time pros. Which is actually correct, because if you look at the data from Colleges Ontario, they hired over the last 5 years, while they expanded all these new international students, they hired almost no new full-time staff. They knew it was a bubble. And so all the staff that were taught to hire were part-time. They had jobs elsewhere, right? This is like a side gig for them, a side hustle. That's who's been laid off. Right? Like 70-80% of the people who've been laid off were people who were brought in part-time. So what you're seeing is the colleges, it's like we blew up a balloon and now we've let air out of the balloon, and the balloon looks more or less the way it did in 2017. Only the provincial government is paying less.
All right, well, let's have that same analysis on the university level.
So universities can't let air out of the balloon the way colleges can, right? They're much more brittle. Their financial structure, they have, they like hiring full-time, and full-time means you're on the collective agreements they have with faculty unions make it very difficult for them to do anything other than hire dismiss junior faculty. The most expensive faculty have unbelievable protections. And so it's very difficult for universities to downsize. Like it's really hard. So the financial hit to Ontario universities, much less than the financial hit to Ontario colleges, right? Like Ontario colleges have lost like a third of their income when international students disappeared. At universities, it's probably about 5%, 10%, but they have them, and it's phased in over a much longer period of time, because the colleges, they're teaching people for 8 months. So when that money goes, it goes. Universities are hiring for, they're teaching for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It takes longer for the effect of a visa hit to cycle through the system. But they're just more brittle. They have a lot of difficulty cutting. Like the colleges, they've had very little in the way of an increase from Queen's Park in the last little while. I mean, there was a year there where the University of Toronto got more money from the People's Republic of China than it did from Queen's Park. Not the government in China, but the students from China. So it hurts, but it's hurting in a way that it's like nails down a blackboard, right? Like it's not a sudden thing. It's so slow and painful and screaming and the gears are seizing up, and it's not going to end for another 3 or 4 years at least, I don't think. So it's both shallower and more difficult to resolve at the university level.
I completely agree with everything Alex has said, except maybe one kind of bit of nuance is I don't think the federal government can just put this on the back burner and ignore it. So what the previous, let's say previous government, if you want to call it that, did was that for the very first time, they introduced targets on non-permanent resident resident population and admissions. I have to believe that that's not going to end in November when we get the new targets, which CD Howe, by the way, will be releasing for the first time some recommendations on. Little plug for that committee that's going to be doing some work in the coming weeks. So I think they're still going to have those targets. So they have to think very carefully about how to target the number of new permanent residents, how to set those caps. And I've been quite critical of the caps. I don't think it's the right way to go. I think the problem with caps and capping the number of foreign students coming in is that if you have caps, you have to allocate. You have to decide what schools get how many international students. And governments are not very good at that. And we see that already. And the allocations that have been done are perverse. I mean, so that you have to ask yourself, well, what's the optimal allocation? Well, that depends on what your objective of this program is. Now we've got to think much more clearly about what are we trying to achieve with this program. And that's the crux of the problem is we never really got that right. We never decided what are we trying to achieve with this program.
Or we weren't open about it. You know what I mean? Like I think lots of people had ideas, but you and I were on a call with people from the government of Canada. It was quite clear that immigration and foreign affairs had completely different ideas about what this program was supposed to be about. Yeah.
It's everybody's thought. It's like everybody's going to win from this, and nobody thought about the trade-offs. Yep. Anyways, getting back to the allocation, just to give you an idea of how complex this has become, there's every provincial government has to now allocate what colleges, how many go to a Centennial College, how many go to Algonquin College, how many go to the University of Waterloo. They have to make these complicated trade-offs because there's a ration number of caps. But then, even when they decide how many go to each school, now there's fighting within the schools. So at the University of Waterloo, the departments are fighting with each other about who gets them. So, so how do they do this in some kind of optimal way? That's a really difficult thing, which I have ideas about how to do that, but I don't see that being done.
And to take it up a level, these new caps are about non-permanent residents, right? So there's a trade-off, which we don't know how it's really going to be resolved, between temporary foreign workers and international students, right?
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting because Bay Street, broadly defined, is fighting for temporary foreign workers, because God forbid Canadians pay attention to productivity. But, and so in theory, Bay Street and the universities and colleges are at war because every single TFW you issue is now one less international student.
But sorry, Michael, just one quick point is that what happened to that program is in 2014, the Conservative government cut down on the temporary foreign worker program, but kind of the trade-off was they said, well, we're going to open up work rights for foreign students. So those, in effect, became the new temporary foreign workers. So it's really complicated that they're kind of trying to achieve the same objectives with these two programs. Again, it comes back to thinking a lot more carefully about what's the goal with this program? What are we trying to achieve?
And Alex, in your view, what should we be trying to achieve?
Well, I don't think we should be using international student spots to do what temporary foreign workers are supposed to do. Like, I think everybody can agree on that. And we really lost sight of that during COVID, right? Because, I mean, what was everybody worried about in COVID? It was, oh my God, how is the Timmies in Kincardine going to work if we have to pay people higher wages? Well, let's bring in not internationalists, not temporary foreign workers. That's a bad word. Let's bring in more international students, and that's how we're going to do it. That's how we're going to fill low-wage jobs. And it's why, I would say, in the GTA, most corner stores are now staffed by, or a lot of corner stores and convenience stores are staffed by foreign workers. Same with a lot of the restaurant industry, the fast food industry. That's wrong. We got used to the idea that we need to make international student policy about labor market needs. And in the long term, I don't think that's a bad idea, right? Like, we should be bringing in international students in a mix and proportions that are going to propel the economy to higher ground in the future. I'm not sure I buy Mikal's notion about, linking it to nominal GDP, but I get the idea, right? The idea is growth somehow is the right idea. But now we're saying it's about short-term labor market needs, and that's crazy. Like that, it's like Henry Ford saying, if I just asked people what they wanted, I would have built a mechanical horse. I would have built a faster horse. Like, that's what we're doing a lot of the time in labor market policy. It seems to me is foregrounding the immediate needs, which are often very low-wage jobs, and not thinking about what's the talent we need to make ourselves a real, a strong, independent country 10 years from now.
So then, if nothing changes, 10 years from now, what do Canada's colleges and universities look like?
So I read what Alex Usher writes pretty carefully. And he has pointed out that the solution, I think the time horizon he has in mind is over the past 10 decades. It can't come just from thinking about revenue and where we're going to find more money. It has to also come from the cost side. And as someone who works in a university, that resonates a lot for me. I think there are very clearly potential cost savings by doing things more efficiently. There's all kinds of problems. Faculty incentives are completely perverse. Faculty incentives to work, to put in effort are on all kinds of dimensions are completely perverse. There's also, I think, a need, however, and I think it's inevitable, it's going to happen, that there's a need to, take the handcuffs off post-secondary institutions and kind of let them set their fees to some extent. I think that's where the differentiation comes from, and I think you need differentiation. I think you need a little more competition, a little bit more market in there. Students know where the returns to these programs are, and they're willing to pay for programs. You see that in how much universities and colleges have been able to charge international students. The University of Waterloo is charging, I want to throw a number out there. I think they were getting close to $80,000 per year tuition for an international student. $80,000. That's what the market will bear. And it's because those students know there's a return. And so ultimately, how you do the allocation, how you want to see this moving forward is related to future earnings. And, one really important point in all this, I'll end with this, is that we have developed incredible database, or not we, Statistics Canada and government departments that share the data have developed incredible databases to do research where we can track what the earnings are of graduates of every single program. We literally have databases that include every graduate with all their T1 income tax records. We see what program they graduated from. There's really rich data to see what the outcomes are. That data does not get used in the immigration system. It does not get used in how these permits are allocated. It doesn't get used for anything. In fact, I have tried very hard to get permission to do analysis with that data where we differentiate between programs of studies and schools, and they won't allow it. Statistics Canada won't allow that kind of analysis to be done. So I think that's where the future lies. We need this to be data-driven.
So what's your message to Ottawa and the provinces?
The point system is a prediction of migrants' future earnings in Canada. And that's what needs to be prioritized. And that's not what's being prioritized now.
Talent doesn't just mean PhDs, right? I mean, I think there's some areas in different parts of the system. It doesn't just need to be universities, but that's clear. They have to have a strong goal.
And to the provincial government, I think they need to think a lot more carefully about how they allocate these foreign student permits and what exactly they're trying to achieve. They need to be more strategic about how they allocate and do be more thoughtful.
Spend more. Our universities and colleges would not have got into this mess, would not have gone chasing international student dollars if Ontario weren't the worst funded system in the entire country. Get to work on that.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Alex Usher is the president of Higher Education Strategy Associates. Mikal Skuterud is a professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Waterloo and a fellow in residence at the CD Howe, and a member of a group trying to figure out where we go from here. And we'll have more on that coming up in another podcast. For further insight into the intersection of immigration and education, visit cdhowe.org. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us.